Okay, perfect. So we'll get started here on this. So hopefully you can see the slide still now that I hit the record button. And what we're doing today, you can see in the schedule is week 8. So it's chapter 10 and 11. And this week you should be doing that. But the only thing sorry, my voice is going now. Just 1 second here. For the midterm, it's only till chapter 10. So that means that if you wanted to get up to chapter 10 this week, then you can always do chapter 11 after on next week, because you can see the midterm next week, chapter 1 to 10. So what you could do is just go, okay, I'm going to just finish chapter 10, make sure I understand all the content, and then start on chapter 11 afterwards. So what we're going to do next week, I'm going to talk more about that in a minute here, but for the midterm, what we're going to do is have it on the Wednesday class, because that will give us chance on Monday to talk more in detail about the midterm, because we'll have already covered chapter 10 this week and you'll have had a chance to work through it. So Monday in class, we'll talk about, the structure, how you log in. I have the link in this presentation just so you can see how to get into the Zoom meeting for the Wednesday. But in addition, you can, what was I going to say about that? For the Zoom on Monday, you can ask any questions you have. So for example, if you finished up to chapter 10 and there's something you just can't figure out, then on Monday, you can ask that before we're doing the exam on Wednesday. So the Wednesday will be at 10 a.m. Usually that's reserved if you have questions you want to talk about, you can book a meeting for that. But in this case, on the Wednesday, we will have the actual midterm exam. So does anyone have questions before we get into the material? And like I said, we'll talk a little bit more. I'll give you the link for the exam coming up here, but does anyone have any initial questions? I see one that said we'll have our exam on Wednesday, which I just think I answered, so that's good. So yes, Wednesday, that's June 29th, I believe, right? That's what, yep, that's correct. Wednesday, June 29th. So on the calendar, it just tells you that the week is the 27th and the 29th, right? So makes sense to do it the latter half of the week, because otherwise if we did it on Monday, then what do you do on the Wednesday for the rest of the week? You wouldn't have any material. This way, it works perfectly because you can do chapter 10 this week, focus on finishing, making sure you understand everything. Monday, we'll cover chapter 11, but you can ignore it. It'll mostly be, ignore it until after Wednesday's midterm, but at least we'll do the material and you can look at it on YouTube after the exam if you're kind of going, no, I just want to focus on making sure I understand everything up till chapter 10. So I see something else in the chat. Oh, so the way the exam is going to work is the same way as you download all the CAB files already. So if you look on Moodle, you guys, how many of you guys have pulled the CAB files already to check them? Has anyone done that? Like for the solutions that are on CAB where you pull a backup file? Ryan's shaking his head, yes. And Nicole's saying she doesn't know how to. So basically all it is it's a file on Moodle, and you just download it like you would any other document. Like if you wanted to download the syllabus or anything else, if you save it the way you're instructed to for the CAB files in Citrix, if you can use those, because you initially set up all your folders in Citrix for the course. So what you're going to do for the exam is do it the same way, where you'll have a file that's in Moodle that you can download, work on it in Citrix, and then you're just going to upload it to Moodle. So yes, it is going to be in Moodle. That's how I'm planning to do it. I think that's the easiest, unless anyone has any other comments, because this way you guys can, this week, go in, make sure you know how to download the CAB files, work on them in Citrix, and then make sure you know how to save everything in Citrix. So that's a good test for you to do this week. Try it out, make sure you understand. And you do the work on Citrix because you have to, because you guys don't have Sage on your personal computer, correct? Unless anyone does, but I doubt you do. So Citrix is how you use Sage all the time, right? If anyone wants to chime in and ask questions or talk about their experience with Citrix, that would be great.
Hey, Linda.
Hey.
Hey, so sorry, when you say download the CAB files, do you mean just like we did for the chapters that we work on?
Exactly.
Like, yes. Okay, because there's in the student files and solutions and everything, there's there's 3 different types of, I guess, resources. Like there's the PDF journal entry solutions, and then there's 2 other, I don't know what they are. They're like CAB files or something.
Exactly.
And you said that we could. Yeah, you
Yeah,
said we
and
could use
cab
those to check
file-
our setup. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and cab file doesn't mean anything. It's just the extension that Sage is using. So whenever you save a file for Sage, it has .cab at the end. So that file is the one I'm talking about. So let's say, I'm just going to give you an example. This isn't the one that you're doing for the exam, but let's presume you're working on chapter 7. No, that's a bad one. Whatever. Let's say chapter 9. You're working on chapter 9. And let's say I told you to pull a file just like you do for your student data files now, and you pull chapter 9 and you open that up and you work on it and then you save your work. Does that make sense, Nicole? The cab file is what you would be opening up to do the work for the midterm.
Yeah, so the data files for students and the cab file solutions,
Yep.
you said that we could use those to check if the setup that we did was correct.
Mhm.
But I don't actually know how to do that, because when I open it up, I just get all these weird files and stuff. So I just kind of closed out of it right away because I got confused.
Oh, you mean to check the actual cab file versus the
Yeah.
PDFs. So the cab
Yeah.
file, you would actually just have to go in every menu. So when we get into the demo, you guys can see my slides right now, but when we go in the demo, maybe I'll just show you how you would check certain things. But basically the way you check is the same way you do something. So if you wanted to check, for example, that your chart of accounts was set up correctly, you would go into the solution file exactly where you would have set things up and look at it. Or say you wanted to check your chart of accounts, you could literally go into a chart of accounts report. If it was shortcuts, you could go into shortcuts. So let's leave that question, Nicole, because when I'm in Sage demoing it, I can just show you things and then you can say, okay, where would I go for this or where would I go for that?
Okay,
so literally
perfect,
you're just going in exactly how you do the work, and then you would check what they did and you would compare it to what you had done.
Okay, and then for the exam, when we download the cab file to do it, that would be through the Citrix Moodle, right? Like we can't just do it in the regular Moodle?
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
because
Thank
it's a
you.
cab file. You don't have Sage on Moodle. That's the problem. If I was doing a multiple choice exam, I could have easily given you a multiple choice, got you to do it all right in Moodle or whatever, an exam, and then just it would be there. But because it's a Sage file, because I don't want to give you guys a multiple choice exam, because that would be crazy. How would you remember? I'm like, oh, where do you go to enter this? That would be silly, because the point of the course is to teach you how to use the software. So what you'll be doing is exactly what you do in the textbook, where you open up a file, or you could be even creating a new file in Sage, but in this case, for the midterm at least, it'll be a file that is used. I'm sorry, I'm just reading something else in the chat here. Yeah, so the document will be in Moodle. So there is the two pieces. I didn't get as far as explaining that. So you'll have two files, which we're gonna, when we do the exam, by the way, it's not just gonna be, you're gonna have to go find them. What I'm going to do in the Zoom meeting is share with you on Moodle where the files are. So there'll be one file that's a PDF that gives you the instructions of what you need to do. And then there'll be the cab file that you would download, use, do all your work, and then submit it. And there is one thing you do need to do this week is make sure you know how to submit, because there is a video already on Moodle for that, which if you can't see that right away, when we get into the demo, when I'm out of the slides, I can show you guys where that is too. Did you guys do that steps for submitting assignments and exams already? Did anyone watch that video just yet? Not yet, Ryan says, perfect. So that would be the primary things to do this week. So make sure you understand chapter 10 and do that. And then your submission, you want to do that as well. So as long as you, like, again, on Monday, you can ask more questions if you have problems. And on Wednesday, I'm going to pull up, like, we don't need to cover any material at all on Wednesday. All Wednesday is your exam. So what we'll do is we'll go in, I'm going to share Moodle with you. I will show you where the exam PDF and cab file is, and then you'll go download it just like you do any cab file in the student files for working on a chapter. Does that clarify exactly how the exam would work? Any other questions on that? Hopefully not. And Nicole asked, do we have to have our camera on for the exam? And I don't require you to. I, in this class, am expecting you to figure out how to do things in Sage, which in real life, you would be going into things, looking it up. I don't mind if you look at the textbook as you're trying to do things. And in terms of how long to write the exam, it's meant to be a 2-hour exam, but I'm going to give a little bit of extra time. So I was talking to one of the other instructors, Joan, who was your sub last week, and she said, you know, in reality, if it takes you a bit longer because you have some technology problems or whatever, the idea is that you go in, you change some settings, you might have to create a new customer, whatever it is that you're doing, and you're entering journal entries, then you're going to have to, you know, upload the thing. So at the end of the day, as long as you get it done within about a 4-hour period after we start the Zoom call, then that would be good. Just make sure it's submitted at the end of the 4-hour time frame. Ideally, you'd finish it a lot quicker, but depending on how long it takes, what I'll do with the Zoom is I'll show you where the files are. Anyone who is, you know, good and everything works, they're just going to get off the Zoom call and they're going to start working. And when they're done, they're going to submit the exam. And so Moodle's where the files will be. Yeah, so Moodle, I will show you on Wednesday, here's where the files are, and then you would put them in, because when you grab them from Moodle initially to work on them in the textbook, you do it exactly the same way. So I figured that would be the most simple way to do it, I think. And I got another question, is the format just like the exercises in each chapter? It will be similar, right? Obviously it wouldn't be like, I mean, if we're doing inventory, for example, this week, if you were doing inventory, it would maybe ask you to enter a new supplier or a new whatever. So yes, that format, in the format, it will be similar. And it'll be more of the way where you're not told what to do. So if you look at where you had a week of sourced transactions, where it's like, hey, you know, week of August 14th, and it gave you 20 things you had to do, and it didn't tell you where to go to do it, that would be kind of how the exam format would be. Okay, perfect. So I think we covered a lot about the exam. So the only other thing I'll need to cover at the end then would be the link for the Zoom meeting, so that you can make sure, because the Monday meetings are on one Zoom, and I just wanted to set up the Wednesday separately so that we can have that. And I will put that on Moodle too, so that I can say midterm exam, I can have the Zoom link initially, and then when we're going to get to the time of the exam on Wednesday, that's when those files will be saved. So they won't be there initially, but I will go in today and actually put the Zoom link, so that way you'll know where the exam files will be saved, because the Zoom meeting will be, hey, it'll be under midterm exam, and then I'll put a little note that the rest of the files will be there as well, including the PDF that you will use. Okay, so now let's go through the rest of the slides. So general reminders, make sure, of course, that you, I already talked about this lots of times about making sure you use the client's chart of accounts, but you're going to do that for other things. And now in this chapter, we're adding in inventory and services. So you want to make sure you go into the correct module for transactions. So I've still had some people asking questions about, you know, how do I go do whatever it is, payroll, and I'm trying to do a journal entry to something that's in a linked account. So make sure that whenever you're in a linked account type thing, like accounts receivable, accounts payable, inventory, and payroll, you cannot do a general journal, a journal entry to any of those linked accounts. So some companies use a provider for payroll, say it's ADP. In that company's case, they wouldn't have an employee and payroll module set up in Sage because they don't need to. They would get a report from ADP payroll. And then in that case, you would just record a journal entry for payroll. So then you would do it, and then those payroll accounts wouldn't be linked, right? So it would be easy to do a journal entry to all those accounts. Same thing for inventory. If a company was, let's say, a service-based business and didn't have any inventory, you wouldn't see the inventory module. But if it's there and they have inventory, then when we're entering invoices for customers, it's going to be a little bit of a different process. So what we cover in chapter 10 is inventory related purchase transactions, also sales of goods and services, how you can make an adjustment to inventory, how you can assemble a new inventory item for other inventory. And I'll show an example of this right in a few minutes here. But what that means is, let's say you're building something and you need to take a whole bunch of components out of your raw materials, maybe add labor, all those things. You need to then take all the components, make an actual piece of inventory to sell to a customer. So that's what we'll talk about in that section. Also, you would learn how to enter returns on sales and purchases, create credit notes, entering sales to preferred customers, entering freight on purchases, understanding integration of inventory with payables, receivables, and the general ledger. Because as I just mentioned, if you were doing a regular purchase transaction without inventory or a sale transaction without inventory, the process might be a bit different. And you'll learn how to create new inventory items and then obviously talk about the inventory reports. So in terms of what Sage looks like, you could see inventory and services in my screen here. And in there, you can see a bunch of things, a few icons: build from a bill of materials, build from item assembly, adjust inventory, and transfer inventory. And then there's tasks, inventory, and services. And on the far right of my screen, you can see inventory items. I highlighted that there. So you can see all the different inventory they have. So this particular construction business has concrete blocks. They have deck 8 by 8 feet, fences, handles, etc. And so when you're looking at these nails and everything, if they were selling these individual components, we would be able to take one of these components right out of inventory and sell it to a consumer. In the case of a manufacturing company or a construction business, however, generally they're probably not going to sell a nail, right? Maybe they do too, but maybe they don't. So in that case, what they would be doing, maybe you're going to have a assembly order where it says, hey, take this many nails, take this many concrete slabs, take this many, whatever the other components are, and build one shed or build one thing, and that shed would be sold to a customer, right? So those are the individual, that's kind of an overview of what you do in inventory. Oftentimes is you have individual components and then you sell them. Yeah, don't they have nails as a quantity? Yeah, no doubt. So yeah, and you can see here they're counting each one individually, which sounds crazy. Can you imagine counting like 4,000 nails in inventory? I can tell you though that it kind of seems funny, but I had a job a long time ago when I was just out of school, where I worked at a food equipment company, and they had little components that were put into food machines. And at inventory time, we literally had a box of, you could put like, you know, whatever the little things were. It wasn't nails. I can't remember what it was. It might've been screws. And we literally did have to count them all. So it's crazy as it sounds, sometimes that happens. Then items that you want to watch for. So when you are entering an inventory transaction, there's a lot of different details. There's the quantity, there's the inventory item, and there's taxes. So what I would recommend doing every time you're doing an inventory transaction, make sure you review the inventory sales journal before you're posting, because if you post something and it's wrong and you made one little mistake, it'll affect everything, and it's a little bit hard sometimes to find what it is and go back in time. So it's covered on page 363. It gives you it gives you a couple warnings. So the warning says you should always check that the taxes are correct. If you're unsure, you could change the tax code for the books and service items to G. This extra step is required in later chapters. But then you can see I put a little button that says reviewing the inventory sales journal transaction. So in this case, if the textbook shows you the entry, you could go in and review the sales journal. And as long as every journal entry debit and credit matches with the right GL account and the amount, then you know you've entered everything correctly. If you were doing something where, see, the textbook didn't have, like in this case, it's teaching you, so it's telling you to do it. But let's say in a later chapter, you were told to enter an inventory item, a transaction, for the textbook, and it didn't show you what the journal entry should be. And you go, oh shoot, I want to check if I've done this right, because maybe there's so much data entry, you're going fairly quickly, you're worried you might have made a mistake. What you could do then is go in ahead of doing the chapter, print your PDF journal entries. That way, when you go enter the journal entry or the details for the inventory, you could actually pull up this journal entry like I'm just showing on the screen here and match it to the solution before you even post it. Has anyone done that already, where they had all the journal entries for the chapter and that you looked at them as you went at all? Ryan's saying yes, so good. And that is very helpful. Oh, and I see one comment. Oh yeah, the taxes for employees was annoying for chapter 9. One check mark inputted wrong, made all the payroll incorrect, had to adjust every single paycheck individually. So that is an exact point of what I'm trying to get at here, is that anything that you can check before you post is going to help you. But yes, you have to, payroll is my least favorite thing in this whole textbook, payroll, because like you said, it's a check mark and you have to look so anally with it. And one thing I'll mention too is if it's not an assignment or an exam for marks, if you mess one thing up, and you can't figure it out, try to figure it out. If you can't, leave it and go on. Because at the end of the day, I mean, if it was a client, yes, you'd have to do it. So it doesn't hurt to learn. But let's say you're running out of time and you're like, my God, I don't know where I went wrong. Just keep going. For examples, let's say it was an exam and you made one mistake. I would look and go, oh, you did this one thing wrong. You lost 1 mark. So if you in the exam spend an hour and a half to figure out 1 check mark wrong, I mean, at the end of the day, it would hardly impact your mark. That's my point. So don't worry too much. It's good when you're learning to try to fix things, because in real life, if it was a client and you're paying them, you do have to get it right. So good thing to do, but it can be very onerous. And the same thing goes for inventory. If you enter taxes wrong, it could be a huge issue. So yeah, good thing to note.
Hey, Linda.
Yep.
Regarding like, so if we're doing the exam and we do one thing wrong, but then it affects all the other numbers after that, we would just lose that 1 mark.
Yeah, it depends what it is. So for example, like if you made, like, let's say I was looking at your income statement and you had 1 number wrong, I would look to see which entry you did wrong. And if it was just 1 account that had the wrong amount, you would just lose 1 mark for that. And if it affected other things, yes, you wouldn't get double counted over and over again for it.
Okay, perfect, thanks.
No problem. Yeah, that'd be scary. And I see the comment too that adjusting entries at the end of the month are a little hard. So the journal entries help with it. That's one thing I did want to just talk a brief amount about too. So thanks for that reminder, because this course isn't really meant to teach you accounting, right? This course is meant to teach you Sage. And you notice that in the textbook, because the textbook will just say, you know, do an entry for whatever it is. In the appendix of the textbook, there is a review of accounting. If you really feel you don't remember anything about debits and credits or how it works, there is an appendix you could go to. I'm just going to look at what the appendix number is because I can't remember now, but I looked at it this morning and I know I wanted to mention it to you guys. So there is an appendix on correcting errors after posting, which is Appendix C. Appendix B is terminology used. And then let's see. Maybe I should go to the table of contents. That's one other thing. We're going to cover that in a minute here. So yeah, I'll come back to that. I'll see if I can find it when I'm looking at the other slides. So, and Ryan's saying he mostly uses the PDF to double check for typos that made my numbers wrong. And that's what I would do too. Like I'd have it printed in case, if it's a really big, ugly thing like inventory or payroll, where a 1 mistake could be a huge thing, rather than waiting till the end to check it, I would do it as you go, just check that particular entry. But it's good if you, like for most things, if you just went and did a whole week of transactions and posted them all, printed your trial balance, and then matched it to the solution, you'd be good to go kind of thing, right? And then you wouldn't have gone too far. Another thing to note about this chapter, so sometimes you need to reverse a posted invoice rather than correct it. So this is talked about on page 363. And the reason that you might do this, so you know how all the modules we could hit a little pen to do an adjustment. So if you did a journal entry, you made a mistake, you just go into the journal entry, hit the little pen, correct whatever number was wrong, and it's nice and easy. Same thing with an invoice, like a receivable or a payable. You can do that almost all the time. However, this chapter reminds you that if you pick the wrong customer or the wrong supplier, there will be some issues. So the warning says, if you selected the wrong customer, the customer options such as payment terms, price list, or tax codes are not updated and may be incorrect. For these errors, you should reverse the entry. So just keep that in mind. If you make a mistake in amount, like you entered $1,030 instead of $1,003, go ahead and hit your pen and correct that, right? If you entered the wrong GL account when you were doing a purchase invoice, do the pen, correct that. But if I accidentally picked ABC company as my vendor and it should have been ABC Engineering, and in real life, this actually happens quite a lot, unfortunately. There are a lot of companies that have similar names. So if you pick the wrong one, that's when instead of hitting the pen, you would reverse and then you would redo it. Does that make sense to everyone? Only person I can see is Ryan and he shakes his head. So I'm just going to presume everyone else agrees that it makes sense unless you put other question in the chat box. Okay, so new supplier and new tax code. So Page 389 basically shows you a warning, like it basically shows a warning. It says you will need to add the tax code and the account for the new supplier in the journal. Alternatively, you can use the full ad and enter these details in the supplier's record. So in this one, it's giving you two ideas of what you can do, but it's not going to tell you how to do it because it was covered in an earlier chapter. In this case, what I wanted to tell you is I would recommend using the full ad for the supplier because it's the easiest way, because you can do the supplier and the tax code together. But what I also wanted to just tell you is when I was looking at this going, I could see you guys, because I always try to tell you what would be maybe confusing as you're looking. You might go, well, which way should I do it? What's the best way? So like I just said, the full ad is the best way. But let's say you go, shoot, I don't remember how to do a full ad. Or I don't remember how to do tax. Like I don't know how to add a tax code. I forget how to do that. And I want to look it up. If you forget, you can always look in the index. So I put an example here of a snippet from the textbook in the index. So the index is at the very back. And I don't know, does anyone have a printed copy of the textbook, or are you all using the ebook? Sorry, Ryan, you're on mute.
Ebook.
Ebook. Printed for Tanya. So I'm going to tell you two different things to do. Okay, so if you have a printed book, I don't know if anyone has a printed book handy, but if you do, you're going to see something kind of cool. I'm going to actually pull it out of my book. I'm ripping it out, so I don't like doing that. I won't find it. And I'm going to try to put it on the camera so you could see it. So it is a bookmark. It's a ruler. You guys see that? So the people that have a printed textbook, I like this a lot. I use this if I'm like, let's say I haven't done Sage for a long time and I'm like, oh shoot, I don't really have to enter, I don't know, whatever it is, very often, or do something very often. This bookmark is like a quick thing. So for example, I'm going to read it because I can't really show it to you perfectly. I tried to find it in the ebook and I couldn't find this ruler. But for example, it says keystrokes for journal entries, and it tells you the page number in the textbook that it is. So it says account reconciliation, allocations, credit card payment, credit note, on and on it goes. Then it has keystrokes for setup at the bottom of the ruler. Sorry, I'm trying to show it kind of well here. So the bottom of it, I really like. So let's say you forget how to do setup. It says account rec, bank accounts, budgeting, cash-based accounting, credit card, customer records, departments, foreign currency, employee records, inventory record, payroll, etc. So I use this ruler. If you have it, I would use it first, but then not everything's on it. So it doesn't help for everything because it's one little tiny bookmark, right? So this, I use it, and Tanya's saying she didn't notice it. So that's why I wanted to bring it up right now, just because I figured you guys might not notice it. And right now, I mean, up to this point, you hadn't learned all the modules mostly. So, you know, you're getting instructions in the textbook, but now you're getting to the stage where so many of the things, they don't show you how to do it anymore because they presume you know. So the ruler is kind of a good thing. Then the other thing is the index. So the index is every single thing. So if you wanted to know about taxes, you could go into T. I put in the supplier one here, where under suppliers, you could see adding new supplier record, but I looked at full ad because the warning told me you could use the full ad. So I just saw, oh, hey, it shows me full ad is on page 124 of the textbook. So you can use this in your exam to look stuff up. I just wouldn't do it for everything because it'll take you a long time. So ideally you would be, you know, doing this because you know how to do it, but if you have to look up the occasional thing, you can obviously do so. Oh, and stupid question for the test. If we have to answer supplier, customer, employee information, is the redundant info such as phone numbers and addresses necessary, or just the stuff that impacts the entries like account info, payment terms, etc. In most cases on the exams, if you had a picture, you wouldn't need to enter all that. And I think I might have not mentioned that ever before, but yeah, if there's something like a whole big address and you didn't want to enter it and you abbreviated, go ahead. In real life, you obviously have to enter it because you're going to mail statements to customers. But yeah, for the exam, I'm not going to test you on, oh my God, did you enter the address correctly? But other things like all the numbers, that's important, but there might be things like set up a shortcut in Sage, or, you know, create a new customer or something like that. As long as you knew how to do it. I mean, sometimes you'll need to set up a default account for that particular customer or supplier, but yeah, things like addresses, that's not a big deal. So does that help you guys with, has anyone used the index before? define things? No. So in the textbook, ebook, sorry. So I told you about the ruler if you have a printed textbook. I told you about the index, which is in bold. The other thing in the ebook that is handy is if you go into table of contents, you can then just search for the index and go right to it. So that's the other thing I just wanted to mention, because that'll make it a lot quicker for you to do. So then I just put the objectives for chapter 11 right here. Like I said, this isn't on the exam, so I don't want you guys to focus on it right now. And this chapter has a whole bunch of different things, which a lot of customers don't even use in Sage because it has quotes. So for example, if a customer came into the food shop, the food equipment shop I worked in, they could have said, hey, I want a quote. And they could have used Sage to do a quote. And then after you do a quote, you could convert it into an order if the customer goes ahead and orders the goods. So basically a quote doesn't do any journal entries. That's the only thing I wanted to tell you now. If you start on chapter 11 and you go, hey, I always review the journal entry to make sure it's correct. Quotes don't have journal entries because all you're doing is quoting to a customer that if they buy this shed, it's going to cost 10 grand. That's it. Once you convert it into an order where the customer's ordered it and then an invoice, then there's going to be journal entries. So that's the only thing I wanted to mention just for now. But chapter 11, obviously you can focus on that after the midterm. So next week, like I said, finish chapter 11 afterwards. Midterm will be on next Wednesday. We'll start at 10 a.m. and I have the link on the next slide. So, you could just go into that link. I would go ahead and put that link into your calendar for next Wednesday at 10, because that way I will come online just like we did right now. And I will show you where the exam is. And I mean, that's what I would do in class basically is, hey, everyone, here's where the exam is. And if you have problems, call me over. In this case, I'll say, here's where the exam is. And if you guys figure it out and you start working, you just get off the Zoom meeting, go ahead and work and submit. If you have issues, I'll still stay on the Zoom exam for the first hour so that I won't be talking or anything. I'll be on mute with no video. But then if you have a question, you could say, hey, I'm having problems. And then we can do a one-on-one with whoever has the problem. And that's just problems, not questions about the exam, obviously. This is just questions about, hey, something's not working, I can't do it. And then we'll figure out a way to go ahead and download it or something, if there's any technology glitches, that kind of thing. And then let me go to the last slide. So here is the link to the midterm. So if you have problems submitting, can you email me? That's a good question. I think if you guys test out 7-zip, where you can save a CAB file, and you'd have to have it outside, you'd have to have the ability to save the CAB file to your computer. And the problem with CAB files is they're big, so you can never email them because they're so big. But there is a free zip software called 7-zip. So if you could zip the file and send it to me, that would be an option. And if you're thinking you might want to test that out, maybe try that now. Just zip a CAB file that you're working on and just send me an email, and in the subject line specifically say, accounting 2206 test CAB file, and make sure I get it, and then I'll make sure I can open it. But again, make sure you go into the video on Moodle, which I'm going to show in a minute here. Does anyone have any other questions? So the exam time starts at 10 a.m. Ideally, you'd be done by noon, but I'm giving you up till 2 p.m. in case you have any technology issues, or let's say it takes us half an hour for everyone to download. Whatever the case is, you have to submit by 2 p.m. No other questions? Okay, I'm going to close the Sage file here. Okay, or the PowerPoint, I mean, not Sage. I'm going to bring up the Sage file is what I meant to do. I just moved it over. Can you guys see my Sage file right now or no? Yes? Okay, perfect. So a couple of things I just wanted to show, I guess, in terms of the module for inventory. I'm in inventory right now. So if I went in to build from an item assembly, I just wanted to show you what this screen would look like. And this is something I wanted to point out because it is a little bit confusing for students at first. And this is one of the things I've had a lot of questions at when we were teaching in person. So let's say I was making well, it doesn't matter what it is. I'm just going to say it's a bundled good for sale. Oops, I can't type. And then the assembly components is all the individual items. So if I click here, we can see all the inventory. So this is concrete blocks. So say I want to select concrete blocks. I could say, maybe I need 10 of these for whatever it is I'm building. And then it'll tell me the cost is $23.90. And then I can say, okay, I want, I don't know, some screws. Now, if anyone's a builder, these components maybe totally don't go together to make anything, but bear with me. Let's say I need 3 pounds of screws. And that's all I need. My cost here is $25.18. Can everyone see that? That's the total cost. I can also put in some additional costs. Maybe I have $1,000 of extra cost. So now my cost is $1,025.18. Then what I have to do, this is not enough. I have to then go into as an assembled item and say, okay, my assembled item is actually, maybe I'm making a shed, which obviously I don't have the right components to do that. But let's say it's a shed. And it tells me other information, allow 2 days for building and shipping a customer. Okay, fine. I'm going to close it. The key thing here is that the amount, so say I'm making 1 shed, the total amount here has to agree. So if I just take this out now, this isn't a realistic example at all, but the amount for the shed is a 605. But at the end of the day, if I was making one, you'll see when you do it in the textbook that the total amount here and here has to be the same or this won't work. So the idea is if I had, you know, and the example in the textbook is actually a kitchen package. So if I had a microwave, a stove, a dishwasher up here in the assembly components, and down here I had the assembled item as the kitchen package, the cost of the kitchen package has to equal the cost of each individual appliance. Does that make sense to everyone? No questions on that? So that's the thing to watch. If it doesn't agree here, you won't be able to post it. So anyway, that's the inventory, which I'm trying to close it. Oh, it's going on my other. It's saying, do you sure you want to discard? Yes, I do. And then the other thing, talking about the CAD files, if you wanted to check your work, let's say in a company setup, you were asked to create shortcuts. There's no solution that could show you what the shortcuts are, but if I look on my screen here, you can see in this example, I have shortcuts for pay expenses, create sales invoice, balance sheet report, income statement. So you would just look at the solution to make sure your shortcuts were the same as what you were asked to do. If it was a company setup thing, you would go into setup here and you would go into settings and you would just look at whatever the setup was. Let's say you were asked to set up linked accounts in a certain way. You can look here in their general and linked accounts, and there's the retained earnings one. You could go into payables, and there you could go into linked accounts. And you can see what accounts are set up here. So if it asked you to set up specific accounts here, and you wanted to check that you had done it correctly, you'd go into the solution file and check right here, just like you did when you set up, and just make sure your accounts here all match. So does that answer the earlier question about how you check your work in a CAD file? Yes, no other questions I'm seeing, nothing else in the chat. So hopefully that helps. Does anyone else have any other questions? I don't have anything else to cover today. Ryan's saying no. Anyone else? No, we have 10 people today. That's better. I don't. How was the class last week? Any comments on the payroll or anything? Ryan's saying good, wonderful. Yeah, I was in a conference, so that's why Joan was covering, and Joan actually taught the course for a very long time, so that's awesome. So yeah, so I will upload this video to YouTube right away here. That way, if you want to go back and just remind yourself of any of the details about the exam or anything else, and obviously there's only 10 people in the call, so the rest of the people will be able to watch as well. So have a great week, everyone, and make sure if you can finish all the way up to chapter 10. And again, if you want to review some of the material, because this is a hard exam to study for in terms of you're literally working through the textbook, doing things over and over. It doesn't hurt though if you're thinking, oh, I don't really understand too well, or I want more practice. If you do have extra time, not that you will, it doesn't hurt to actually go into chapter 11, start doing the work, because then you do redo some of the other things. You would actually go in and go, okay, like you would be learning some new things, but you'd also be entering more invoices, more purchases, more other things. So it's not, I mean, it's not other, I mean, there's new stuff, but there's still some of the old stuff because every chapter builds on each other. So for next Monday, you just use the regular Zoom meeting that we use every week. That's correct. We'll do chapter 11. We'll do some, the same thing we did today with chapter 10. We'll go through some of the things to watch out for in the chapter. But again, you can kind of, if you want to, you could almost ignore that and just come on to the extra Zoom for Wednesday, where it is actually the exam, and then do the Monday part after Wednesday when you've done the exam, you know everything to chapter 10, then you look at chapter 11 in more detail. So that's totally up to you. And by the way, the reason chapter 10 and 11 are together, I didn't mention this, is because they both cover all the stuff with inventory, orders, quotes. It's all kind of a related topic. So that's the only reason they're in the same week, is that it's kind of a related material. And that's why I'm saying if you want more practice and you have time, doing chapter 11 ahead of time isn't bad. It's just you won't be on the exam asked to do an order or a quote or anything like that. All right, well, we will get off the call now and we will see everybody on Monday. And if you have other questions, though, just make sure you send me a message and then we can have a call on Wednesday for that purpose.
Hey, Linda.
Yep.
Sorry, I just have one question, but it's not related to like any of this. It's something back from chapter 8. Do you have a second?
I do, yeah. If everyone else wants to get all offline, I'll just stop the recording right now, since if people have individual questions, I can just stay on and ask and answer those questions.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. Have a good week.
I got to figure out stop the recording here.